And we are live.
All right. Well, my name is Lucas Stuber. I'm a speech language pathologist here with my colleague Narayan from discoveraac.org, which is a new website designed to help parents and professionals worldwide navigate the sometimes complicated world of augmentative and alternative communication. We're thrilled to be here today with Lauren Enders, who is a full-time augmentative communication consultant and specialist in Pennsylvania. A lot of folks, I think, know Lauren from Pinterest, but also on Facebook, Twitter, and as well as, of course, the Practical AAC posts. And, of course, you're a presenter, I think, pretty frequently as well. So thank you very much for being here. We're thrilled to have you.
You're welcome. Here.
Yeah, good. I wanted to ask you just to start out with, what brought you into the field of AAC?
What brought me into the field of AAC? Well, that was actually a pretty easy one for me. I did my master's at the University of Pittsburgh and was fortunate enough to have 5 different practica. So I had a typical school, I had a center-based school, I had an inpatient hospital, outpatient hospital, and the Cleft Palate Craniofacial Center of Pittsburgh. Went in thinking I wanted to work with adult stroke patients, neuro, rehab kinds of things, and found that I was a completely different person after working with the kids who needed technology to communicate.
Wow.
So it was in my early training that I discovered that I loved not only that population, but I'm also very techy and just loved learning about the technology that was out there and playing with it, and that was it. So as soon as I got my first job, I actually requested a caseload with kids who needed assistive tech and AAC, and they easily gave me that.
Awesome, awesome. So Lauren, a lot of your work has also been around talking about how to integrate AAC into everything, right? So,
Yes.
but that's a bit intimidating as well for someone who just starts out, or like because it's a parent or a therapist. It's a bit intimidating. So how does one like go about it? How does one start when you say integrate AAC into everything?
Well, what I try to explain to parents is just that this is your child's voice, so it needs to be available at all times. It needs to be expected at all times that they have something to say. It's not going to be something, I also though explain that it's not going to be something that just happens immediately where all of a sudden they can talk in every single situation, they know enough vocabulary. So starting with things, always making sure that you start with things that are very, very highly motivating for that child and kind of beginning there in your heavy focus. And then, of course, I absolutely pound in as much as possible the need to model whatever system that child is using. I always say that, the biggest single indicator of success or failure is whether that child sees how they are supposed to communicate. We can't tell them, just ask them a question verbally, but never demonstrate on their system or a similar system. So it's kind of what I always explain is that it's about modeling. It's about making sure that situations are engaging and that the children are, or adults sometimes. Sometimes we end up with folks who have gotten beyond that stage of being a child, but still are not in a situation where they really have a good communication system. But it's that they need to understand that we have expectations of them, that we're not speaking for them, jumping in and prompting. So I don't know that I answered that. That's a really tough question, but it's really finding those really engaging moments and starting there, and making sure that there is also vocabulary that's actually going to be meaningful to that individual. There's a lot of problems with the vocabulary that is being selected is only vocabulary that is targeting what we feel are their wants and needs. Which a lot of times does not really have any connection to quality of life for that individual. What we think is important, like bathroom and different foods, while they are important and they need to be part of what is taught, they're not everything, and they are often not what's most motivating for people. Kids want to tell on the kids next to them, tell silly stories, and sometimes those things or complain. Those things are much more motivating and really a place to start as opposed to making them request something that perhaps they could reach out and get on their own anyway.
That's a great point. So Lauren, so what would be like, say, when you said about like, how would you go about finding these motivating things? Would you like interview people, talk to people around the kid? So how would you do like finding out motivating stuff?
One of the things that I like to do whenever I'm working with either a team or a family is I have basically a survey that I give out that looks at every part of life. If we can't really expect someone, if we sit down and say, what is your kid like? Or what would they want to talk about? They're not going to come up with much because we can't really wrap our heads around that at any one point in time. So what I've done is I've taken a really nice survey from Janet's Light, which was really geared towards preschoolers, and I adapted it a little bit along with my colleague Laurie McGowan, and we made this. It's somewhat lengthy. It's about 19 pages long, but it looks at everything, and it asks, okay, favorite TV shows, favorite things to do, what do you do with your parents? And I always say, fill in what you can. If you can't if you don't know, just don't stress. Just kind of go by it and go to the next thing. But then being able to look at this survey, it becomes much more apparent kind of what that child likes, whether it's foods or activities, what they're into. Having it on paper and having kind of gone through all these different areas of life, including leisure, which is really important. It's not something that we would really think about or that parents might think to give us that information without it kind of in that format. So I do use a survey, which is on my Pinterest.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you have the sort of concept of the interest inventory, right? Really figuring out what's going to motivate a child, what they're really into. And I think that sometimes we forget about that also in the school environments, particularly because it's very important for kids to be able to access academics, right? But it's also very important to access these sort of activities of daily living, things that kids would want to do.
Yep, absolutely.
So speaking of which, we're moving into the fall, right? So kids are going to be going back to school. And one thing that you've written a lot about in the past is IEPs and IEPs goals, so individualized education plans. So I'm curious, this is too big of a conversation to have the entire thing now. IEP goals is a really big topic. But what are a couple top tips that you might have for professionals that are writing IEP goals?
Okay. Well, I actually if you see my eyes going to the left, I actually wanted to make sure that I made a couple points, so I have on my screen, I have a couple things I wanted to touch upon. That one of the biggest problems that I see with IEP goals is not even specific to AAC, is that we tend to get these goals that are completely not measurable. It used to be that we could write a goal and just say, so-and-so will improve so-and-so, this skill, which there was really no basis, there's no way of measuring it. So one of the biggest issues is just a general IEP issue, is making sure that whatever goal is written in a way that it can actually be measured, and we can determine whether this child is making progress toward that goal or whether it needs to be a revision and it needs to be modified. So that's one of the things, and I think that's still pretty rampant out there, is people maybe not having the right training or the right skills to write a goal that's measurable. Another thing is that even if it is a measurable goal, it's really essential that that goal be clearly enough written with enough detail that somebody who picks up that goal, either later in the year if the child moves, changes placement, the next year, that they can pick that up and know exactly what they were talking about. So I think it's a really good thing to take your IEP goals, write your draft goals, and hand it to another professional or anybody who might be implementing that goal and say, does this make sense to you? What do you get from that? Because what we think sounds really great in our head and sounds measurable and sounds followable, if that was a word, I'm not sure it is, but I'm going to make it one, I think is not always really the case. So I think we have to be really cautious and make sure that there is enough detail in that goal that it actually can be followed by whoever picks up, that people have a clue of what you intended by that goal. Again, so something not really specific to AAC, more of an issue with just IEP goals in general. A third thing is making sure that we are targeting goals that are actually functional for that student. Not things. Yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice for the child to be able to do this particular skill, but is that really, if we're looking at a child, we're looking at a child with complex communication needs that needs to be able to do a whole lot that perhaps is challenging right now. Are we targeting something that is really crucial to their functioning? Is it something kind of on the fringe that we're just picking? So I think we have to be careful that it's really going to make a difference in this child's world, and that it is achievable within the time frame of the IEP. You see sometimes these kind of big goals that really it's unlikely for them to be met, and then we have a family who feels frustrated because this goal was written and they keep feeling that there's been no progress made. I think we have to be careful that the goals are achievable. And then the final thing about IEPs and AAC is really more AAC related, so now we're on to AAC, is that, and it's something that I remember hearing from Gail Van Tatenhove years ago in a workshop with her, then what she said was AAC therapy is just language therapy. People see, oh, I got this kid that needs augmentative communication, oh my gosh, how do I write a goal? It's the same as writing a goal for anybody else. What are the language skills that child needs right now to be able to move forward? So is it being able to, provide a verb and an adjective? Basically looking at language development, how it should be occurring naturally, and applying that to this child who's using some form of augmentative communication. Really trying to take some of the complexity out of it and saying, look, this is just language therapy. What skill are we trying to provide? And then, of course, your specially designed instruction is going to be a little different because you're using other tools. So there's going to be things related to whether it's technology or whether it's a paper system. There's going to be additional things in your SDI or perhaps in your description of the goal. But really making sure folks understand this is just language therapy.
That's great. That's a really good point.
That's a great point, Lauren, because effectively, out of the 3 points that you mentioned, I think only the last one is kind of partly specific to AAC. The first two are a little more like something that even anyone follows as like, oh, if you write a document, you get it reviewed by someone. If you write software, you get it reviewed from someone. That's like a hygiene sort of a thing. And the second part is like setting expectations in some sense, right? Like it's very interesting that it's not AAC specific. Like if it's going to be a challenge, it's not because it's AAC. It's because like we're not doing certain simple things. If we do certain simple things right, it will make a whole lot of a difference.
Right. Yeah, but that last one is, it really throws people for a loop because, when many people, unfortunately, even at this stage, will, if they're lucky, get one course in augmentative communication in their training, whether even if they're speech therapists, many people will just get one AAC course, and typically that AAC course is really a lot of showing what the technology and the types of AAC are. It really is almost never about implementation. There's maybe a couple programs out there that do a good job of that, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but by and large, I think that it's still an area that we're just not being trained in. Not only SLPs, but then we look at teachers and paraprofessionals who just don't have the knowledge. So when we're looking at a teacher and an SLP who all of a sudden are asked to write an IEP goal for a child with complex communication needs, they think, oh well, I don't know this. I didn't learn this. So I think it's really important to quickly say you can do this. This is just about a child learning language. This child is just using some other methods to get at providing language. So it's making sure that there are some guidelines on what to be expected, in language development, just general language development kinds of things. Well, first we do this, then we do that, then we do that. This is what's important, and trying to kind of quell some of those fears and saying, this is what you do with your other kids. We've just got some other tools thrown in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That's a great point, and I think we have data from the American Speech Language Hearing Association, right, that corroborates that a lot of SLPs, it's a very small, minority that feel comfortable with AAC, so that could go a long way. I've also had speech language pathologists tell me that they think it's a professional liability to admit that they don't know anything because the expectation is that they would. So, I mean, obviously this is a big part of why we wanted to start Discover AAC, right, is to provide a lot more resources.
That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm anxious to be involved because I think it's something that really needs to be out there, that the resources, people do, we do run into some people who don't want to learn, and that's personalities, and but I think by and large people do want to know and want to fulfill the mission statement of being a speech language pathologist. They want to make sure that somebody can communicate. It's just there's fear involved because they don't really know where to go, what to do.
If I could go back for 1 second, you talked very well about setting realistic goals. And sometimes people can struggle with having to write a realistic goal, but also having to balance the expectations of parents, right, which might be higher, as well as our sort of ethical need to presume competence, right, that we sort of assume kids can get to a higher level than they are now. Do you have any tips or strategies in that regard?
Well, I tend to do when I'm either at an IEP or facilitating a set meeting, and we're looking. Of course, set meetings we're not really developing goals, but we do talk about the tasks that we want that student to do, which kind of can translate to goals once we get to an IEP. And one of the things that I try to do is try to lighten the mood a little bit. Is what I'll say is, well, imagine that coming in as the AAC genie, but I can only grant wishes that can occur either in the next 6 months or the next year. So any kind of large overarching statements about, well, I want my child to talk intelligibly, or those are great things, and those are things to look forward to, but that's not what we're focusing on here. We're focusing on things that the AAC genie could potentially, with the right supports, could make come true in 6 months or a year. So think smaller. Think of where your child is right now, and think of those. If you could have one or two things, tomorrow night at dinner, and you could have one or two things that your child could say effectively, could communicate effectively. What are those kinds of things? So I try to kind of pull people back a little bit. Say, look, your overarching goals are great, but when we're writing an IEP goal, or when we're looking at the tasks within a set process, we really need to kind of pare down and focus on something that's achievable in the short term. And then we can keep hoping and moving towards those long-term goals. But to be able to focus, I try to kind of almost give time frames.
Great.
Sometimes it seems to help.
No, that's great. So thinking about the opposite perspective, then, is there anything that you would want to say to parents as far as what should their expectations be walking an IEP meeting? Is there anything they should be critical of or ready to sort of investigate in greater detail?
Well, in terms of parents really thinking about them being prepared when they're walking into an IEP meeting, and we have parents, of course, we have parents who are neophytes to the process and really know nothing. We have parents who now have kids who maybe are in secondary school and they've gone through this process a lot. When I was thinking about that question, it was really, I think that parents do need to whatever their ability level is, and parents have different levels of support and savvy, and but if possible, to try to for teams to give them access to sites like Discovery, Practical AAC, that can give a little bit of information, but it can be overwhelming. So when we are providing families with these kinds of things, and that's why Discovery AAC is nice, because it's small targeted pieces of information that are provided in different methods, whether it's video, reading, whatever works for that person. Practical AAC is also excellent because they're usually nice little short segments, top 10, top 5, because families can really get overwhelmed. But I think we do need to encourage them to really look into this and prepare and do some preparation before an IEP meeting. Not to stress them out, but to make them feel empowered. Like, you can do this. Here's some tools you can do this with. Another thing, and this is something that I've seen from the phenomenal Erin Sheldon, whose daughter Maggie is an AAC user and has Angelman syndrome. And Erin is absolutely genius in what she does with Maggie, and just everything from supporting her friendships to communication to everything that she does. And one of the things that she does with Maggie every year is that she creates kind of a one-page sheet about her daughter. And I would really encourage parents to do that. This is what my daughter likes. This is what she can do at home. This is what she doesn't like. Kind of really giving that parent an opportunity to say, this is what I see my child being able to do. This is what I see as my biggest concerns about their communication. And really, whether maybe it's us actually giving them. Not everybody's going to be like Erin and have this beautifully constructed one-page, visual treat with all this spectacular information. Not everybody's in the position to do that. But what if we created kind of almost like a template of sorts where parents could even fill that in by hand, and they can stick on a picture, having something that could be handed to a parent and saying, no, this is for input. It's important that we know what you're seeing at home, because a lot of times what people are seeing at home is very, very different than what happens at school. So I think that's something else that we could provide to parents. It's not something that I've done, but it's something that I was thinking about and preparing to talk today, and thinking about IEPs and thinking about supporting families. I think that maybe us or somebody developing a template that can then be handed to parents might be helpful, and then it can be shared with the team, and then everybody can talk about it.
That's awesome. We're totally going to do that. That's a really good idea.
That's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, and I have seen some parents pretty effectively build, some little books or even PowerPoint slides. So that's a really great idea, especially also to share, I think, with peers, in the school, so that they know more about their child.
Right. I've also been asked to, and it goes over very, very well. And I don't know in every situation if there's a person that's kind of in a role. I've been asked to go into the regular ed classroom of a child who has a communication device. There's one child where I've been asked every year, it was a request of her mother, that I go into her regular ed class, because she's both learning support and she's included in a regular education class for part of the day, and I've been asked to go in and do a presentation about 45 minutes long about just complex communication needs and devices and people who need communication support. It makes a big, those kids are riveted for 45 minutes. So, they want to learn that. So if we can also provide those kinds of supports to peers, like you mentioned peers, I think those kinds of little presentations, just going in, whether it's, the parent, or whether it's the AAC consultant, the SLP, some going in and, holding up devices and talking about, I'll mention, well, this child is your age. Imagine if somebody was your age and they came in and spoke to you, like you were 5 years younger. Sometimes we accidentally do that, so just those kinds of things, the really crucial things that peers need to know, that if they only knew, they probably would do a beautiful job supporting their peers with complex communication needs. But they need support and training just like anybody else. And it really doesn't, what I found is that 45 minutes goes a long way, or even a half an hour.
Yeah, that's interesting, Lucas, Lawrence, sorry, because this ties back to the entire integration component that we were talking about, right? Because now you're in a classroom where you have these kids around and you want to explain to them, hey, this kid's going to be using AAC, and the peers are also involved and the peers are also excited about using it. And that takes the motivation level onto a different plane altogether. And I think, again, I want to tie it back that these are like very basic things. This is like communicating the fact that you will have a student who's going to use AAC and communicating that fact to the peers. That's all. That's all it is. It's not like a big science behind it. It's just you tell them that someone's going to be using AAC, and this is what we're going to do about it. And like there are some certain simplified basics that we can do so well that I think that's something that we should be talking more about.
Yeah, one of the things when I'm in there is I actually do a little bit on aided language stimulation, is teaching these kids, one of the best ways for your friend to learn to communicate is if you communicate the way that they do. So, they always have to ask. It can never reach in and touch somebody's device because that's their voice. But if they ask and their friend says it's okay, then that might be one of the most helpful things in getting their friends to communicate. So, I even do a little bit with that, and that also makes a difference. I mean, that's one of the, we know, I mentioned earlier, that aided language stimulation, or modeling on the system that child is expected to use, or adult, whoever is communicating with AAC, is one of the biggest indicators of success in that person developing strong language skills.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And like you said about being riveted, I've never met a peer that doesn't want to interact with the AAC device.
I mean, I always, it's kind of, an ego boost for me, because I go into the classroom and I've got, 30 little faces that are like stuck, and I'm not that interesting, but, they want to know. They really do. I mean, yeah, you have to be a little bit engaging, and I can be silly, but I think they just are really, really wanting to know this stuff, and they suck it up, because I'll do little quizzes along the way, and they remember everything I say. So it's something that doesn't take that much time, but can be pretty helpful.
So Lauren, so kind of just taking cue here, you mentioned the integration part here. So what are give us some examples that you've seen of really awesome integrations work. Have you seen something that other people can look up to and probably say, hey, I can do this. I can do some basics right. And some examples of maybe you've seen or implemented successful integrations of AAC.
In some of the classes where I've seen some real success, there have been screenshots of if there is one child with a device, screenshots of that child's main screen. Typically, I'm a big proponent of core language, so there's, depending on the student, there'd be a decent amount of core on that main screen, or perhaps it's a combination, couple of screens that are actually packing taped to the tables in front of everybody. Every kid, not just the kids that are using communication devices or communication books, and teaching the kids to start using aided language, to start pointing to words as they speak. And what we find in the classrooms, and I've done this in one preschool classroom as well, is that, of course, not shocking, the other kids in these classes are also benefiting. And we're seeing language benefits. Their syntax is getting a little better, or their vocabularies are getting a little larger, and the child with the communication system is seeing other people point and use, and that's really invaluable. Also, having things up on, if let's say that we're focusing on the word go, I'll say, okay, we'll go everywhere. Put it on the smartboard. Put it on the door frame. So every time you go out the door that you point, and it needs to look like their symbol, but you point and you say, okay, we're going to go now. So it's really about making sure that communication is everywhere, but also narrowing it enough to say, don't think this is this massive task. You can focus on a couple of words a week and try to just model the heck out of those words. The word go is a great place to start, because go can mean start. Go can mean walk out of the room. And think about how many times you could point to a symbol and model just that one word in a day. So if you focused on that and maybe one other word for a week, it can really make a pretty notable difference. So, the classrooms where I've seen the most success is when there have been communication displays, taped to the tables, on the walls, also, kind of cheat sheets about how to interact with people who have complex communication needs. I've made a couple. There's other ones that other people have made where they've been printed on I'm moving too much, where they've been printed on poster paper and kind of put all over the place, so that the staff in the room is repeatedly reminded of the things, maybe what they shouldn't be doing to support people with complex communication needs, and the things that they should be doing, so that it's really kind of in their face all day long.
Yeah, I'm a really huge fan of this idea that actually Narayan brought this up recently, of the labeled playground. I think I'm gonna try to push this forward with all the schools that I work with. Because why not have the icon for slide there? We can reinforce language all the time.
Right. So as soon as, oh, let's go down the slide, you point to slide. I mean, it just, the opportunities are there, but we need to have the symbols to be able to model it. You know, there's not always, especially on the playground, and that's another thing that people get stuck on a little bit, is that, well, in certain instances, if they are using high-tech systems, they can't be having their system. Well, then it's okay to have a paper model of whatever their high-tech system is. You're still reinforcing language, and you know, they can still be learning. That's something that, you know, people can get hung up on a little bit. So I try to support that idea also. Just, you know, use paper if it's not a situation where the electronics are going to work.
It's funny how we go back to like low tech because something that, you know, works everywhere. So it's really interesting that low tech can solve a lot of problems to begin with, and then you can always graduate to high tech and use low tech whenever you want. And
right. I mean, one of the biggest reasons for high tech is that, you know, we do want these large vocabularies, and it really becomes unmanageable to have a huge vocabulary when it's not high tech, because then you're flipping too much. Whatever the setup is, it's just becomes inefficient. And we know that as soon as it becomes inefficient and difficult, we're only going to see communication in times where it's most motivating, not at all times. So we want it to be, you know, communication has to be easy for us to expect it to happen. You know, we don't do stuff that's hard, so neither are they.
That's good. Let's see. So is there anything that you want to share that we forgot to ask about?
I don't think so. I think, you know, one of the biggest things is just you know, making sure that we provide resources that are not overwhelming to teams and families. I mean, this is an area where people get overwhelmed pretty easily. So, you know, things like one-page cheat sheets and simple little videos that can be watched. Just making sure that we start providing those things, and we do have a great start with, you know, with some great blogs and websites, but really kind of providing tools that make it much more palatable and much less scary to the folks who are supporting people with complex communication needs.
Just curious, Lauren, why is it that we say, like, I know it is overwhelming, like, but from your experience, why do you think people find it overwhelming? Is it because of the complexity? Is it because of the kid? Because the kid's not communicating anything, so you don't really know what's going on in his or her head. Why is this overwhelming for teachers or parents?
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons is because it's an unknown. You know, people are uncomfortable when they feel that they don't know what they're doing. And it's just something, you know, most people, unless it's somebody who's, you know, a career SLP or teacher who is just constantly working with people with complex communication needs, most people are not comfortable. So that they don't, they're just not really kind of sure where to start, what to do, where to go, and I think that fear just kind of jumps in right away. You know, I don't know that I can answer that. That's a big question, but I think a lot of it is fear. It is just, you know, uncertainty and fear and thinking, you know, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to expect. So you know, again, it's down to, you know, providing manageable bits of information. And things that are really encouraging. You know, also making sure that we share successes. I don't think that happens enough. You know, where, you know, I always tell teams, if that child says something on the device that you are celebrating during the day, then get out your phone or take a screenshot and send it home, and you know, have them ask the child, you know, to you know, try to either say it again, you know, what did you say? Look what you said, you know. So just the same way, you know, when we have kids who are typically developing and they do something really exciting at school that there was a big fuss made about, they like to go home and show it and talk about it. Look what happened. Of course, we also have the kids that, what did you do today? Nothing. So, we have that too. But I think it's important to give these kids a voice in not just in communicating their daily needs, beyond wants and needs like we talk about, but just generally daily communication needs, but also kind of just being kids, and being able to share successes, and I don't think that happens enough either.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, because I think one of the things that I follow Dana Nieder's blog, The Uncommon Sense, and she talks about how, like, even parents shouldn't feel guilty about, oh, I could have started this way before. So she talks a lot about how parents feel.
Dana's wonderful.
Yeah, she's awesome, and so it's a lot about, like, also how she writes about keeping like managing expectations, and then what, you can do this, you can do this, it's not difficult. So but that's important for us to, like, kind of bring down the fear, bring down the uncertainty, and like let parents and professionals kind of tread this path with a little less, like, I think a little more enthusiasm rather than anything.
Yep. Yeah, and it's definitely great. And her blog is actually one that I tend to share with parents who are looking for guidance or information, because it's from a parent's perspective, which is invaluable for these folks.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, we have to ask about the funny story, right?
Yeah. No, this is again coming back to Lauren's point about, like, how success stories don't get shared. I think a lot of funny stories don't get shared about AAC at all. It's like it's not that it's funny. It's just that it's a very serious field.
Yes, it is. Okay, so my funny story. It's from a number of years ago. I worked for years. I don't know, probably more than 5 years, with a little guy who had a pretty significant craniofacial anomaly. So he liked to be verbal, and boy was he verbal, but unfortunately he was pretty unintelligible. So we were working with him, oh gosh, this was a long time ago, so he had, he might have had a light writer at one point. We're talking some old systems that he had. I don't remember what he ended up with, but it took some prompting to get this little guy to actually go to his AAC system, because he really wanted to talk. And in my first pregnancy with my daughter, I was rather large and round, and he really wanted to tell me something, basically that he had an impression of who I looked like. And I kept getting the first part, you look like and I could not get the last word. I just could not understand where he was going with it. So finally, I got this little guy to move to his AAC system, and what came out was snowman. So, which I thought was insanely funny, because I kind of did look like a snowman, and it was like an unpure-waisted, little dress, high-waisted, so I really did look like a snowman, and it was just perfect. But it just, I think it highlighted in my mind, and it does over and over again, the fact that, we really need to, just like Dana Nieder talks about, she had a recent blog post about vocabulary and making sure we give enough vocabulary to our kids. We have this tendency, and I say we, educators, speech therapists, to really do this, focusing on wants and needs, and seeing these communication displays that are just chock full of nouns, only, foods and bathroom and things that we think are so essential, when what was really important to this little guy was to tell me I look like a snowman. So if he didn't have the tools to be able to say that, then, his urge to communicate that piece of information would have been lost. So it's just a fun story that kind of reinforces the need to make sure that we have more than foods and bathroom and toys, favorite toys, on their systems, that we're also teaching, interesting vocabulary, core vocabulary, things like that.
Great. That's a really nice story. Uh, so, so Lucas, do you have anything else to ask?
I think this has been fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Lauren, for speaking with us today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to working together more, and love your ideas.
Yeah, awesome. It was awesome talking to you, Lauren. Again, it's a lot
Thank you.
of useful insight, and I think again, so from for me, it's one of the biggest takeaways from this is like how like we can do things a little simple, like we can do a basics right, and I think the intimidation and the fear factor kind of can come down if you do certain basic things right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot we can do. So it's like another reason why again I'm happy to spend some time working on some tools and supports with you guys because I think the ideas are ready and ripe and they need to be put into action.
Awesome.
All right. Well,
All
this is
right.
Right?
Lucas and Ryan from DiscoverAC.org signing off with Lauren Enders here. And come back on Thursday for our next interview with Carol Zangari. Should be a lot of fun.
Woohoo!
All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.